My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. If you're interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is Avery Bellato. I'm a first-year medical student at the Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine, and you are listening to the DO or Do Not podcast. In today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Mylhan Myers, a family medicine and obstetrics physician in Missouri. He shares his journey from a background of old-school house-calling general practitioner relatives into his own modern integrated version of a similar practice, describing the diversity of experiences with procedural medicine, community relationship building, and non-traditional military service that he picked up along the way. The days of house calls may be over, but we hope this episode makes you feel right at home.
Don't mind the horse in the background. Long story short, taking call at my parents' house, and this is my sister's old room.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Myers.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us, what does a normal workday look like for you? Kind of start in the morning and take us through your roles and responsibilities and home life, what kind of patients you take care of.
So I'm a family medicine and obstetrics physician, and my practice is very much like the old GPs of the golden days. My grandfather and some of my other relatives all practiced that way, and I grew up hearing about them practicing in that old GP style. And I said, man, I really want to do that. You know, nowadays family medicine is more just being in clinic. And I was like, man, I want to deliver babies. I want to see patients in the hospital. I want to do procedures. I like everything. I was kind of one of those guys that in medical school, I enjoyed all my rotations, but I was bored after about 2 weeks. So I kind of was able to have my cake and eat it too by doing this. So to answer your question, I get up in the morning, and if I have patients in the hospital, I go to the hospital. I round on those patients. Sometimes it's moms, sometimes it's babies, sometimes it's adults that are my patients from clinic. I'm their family doctor, literally. I have many patients that grandma and grandpa, aunt and uncle, mom and dad, and baby are all my patients. I deliver the baby. I admit the baby in the hospital. I round on mom and baby pair in the hospital, and I see them for follow-up in clinic. So after I round in the morning, then I go to clinic and I see patients all day long. And if I have to go back to the hospital to deliver a baby, then I'll do that, or see any other number of possible hospital patients. My current practice, there's a pretty significant urgent care type component to it. We have a walk-in that's staffed by several advanced practice providers, and I supervise them and augment their practice. So sometimes I see some fairly sick patients, and kind of my style of practice is, if you need to see me today, I'll see you today. And that benefits me because I get to see some more interesting stuff instead of just the scheduled things. And it benefits the patient because they don't have to wait in the ER for 10 hours. Mm-hmm. And they get to see their doctor instead of somebody random at an urgent care as well. We give IV fluids and we do point of care labs. We have x-ray, all that. So if you need a CT scan or something, then of course you need to be in the ER anyway. But we're able to take care of a lot of that stuff that in the good old days used to be taken care of in the clinic, before we kind of turn to this world where we dump everything on the ER, whether it's an emergency or not. So I have clinic. I will leave to go do deliveries or see patients in the hospital. And then if I'm on call, then that may continue throughout the night. If I'm not on call, then I get to go home and be with my family. That's, as far as the job goes, that's kind of the way it goes.
It sounds like a lot of bouncing around. Is that kind of more what you enjoyed?
Yeah, I liked being in the hospital, but I liked the relationships that you build in clinic. I had a hard time picturing myself being a purely hospitalist or hospital-based physician, because it's rare that you make long lasting, enduring relationships with patients. Now, obviously some of that does happen, but it's usually because they're really sick and in the hospital all the time. And like a typical family doctor, I'd say I really valued relationships, but I also enjoyed a higher level of acuity and procedural driven stuff. So being able, again, having my cake and eating it too, being able to be in the hospital and the clinic, being in a different location, yes, going back and forth, not doing the same thing over and over every single day, but having that variety. I was definitely looking for that and fought for that. And I've been very, very lucky and blessed to be able to do that.
And I think that'll resonate with a lot of our listeners. Tell us if and how you incorporate OMM into your practice.
I drink the Kool-Aid for osteopathy. My grandpa went to Kirksville. My great uncles went to Kirksville. My uncle and my cousins went to Kirksville. I'm from southern Missouri, so the same state, but I think it's 3.5 hours away from my hometown. But I grew up hearing about not just OMT, but just DOs. And in rural Missouri for decades and decades, the only doctors were DOs. You know, the MDs were in the cities. And you hear stories from people this day, oh, your uncle or your grandpa set my ribs back in place or whatever it was. So I totally drank the Kool-Aid and I totally embraced OMM in first and second year and enjoyed it. I loved, those OMM professors that they just kind of look at you and be like, you were in a car wreck when you were 12. Just awesome skill to have that really makes us distinct, right? Makes us different. And where many of my MD peers would prescribe pain medication or dump you for a referral you'd have to wait for PT or pain management or something, I have one more tool that is very effective when applied correctly. I love that. What I found when I got to third and fourth year in residency was there were a lot of DO attendings who would say, well, I like OMT. I like the idea of OMT, but I just don't have time to incorporate that in my practice. It takes too much time, blah, 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 blah. And I was so determined to not let that happen to me. And I would say that the outcome is kind of mixed. I probably do OMM once or twice a day. And there's probably times where I should do it or could do it and the patient would benefit. And it's one of those things where it's like a procedure. You've got to make sure the patient is appropriate, consent the patient, discuss the risks and benefits, get everything set up and do that. And anytime in any situation that you're doing procedures, there's a time crunch there. In the world of medicine that we live in, we're pressured for productivity. Fortunately, you can bill insurance for OMM and some techniques are faster than others. But I'd say it's been kind of mixed. I'm not doing it all day long, but I'm definitely using it in my practice. I'm using it sometimes in the hospital, especially with pregnant patients. I have enjoyed that and my patients have appreciated it. It makes me different because patients will say about all DOs, they'll say, well, my doctor touched me, and I felt better because sometimes being a DO is just putting your hand on a patient, because that's not really a barrier for us because we were all kind of grappling each other in OMM lab and stuff and doing a physical exam or anatomy lab or whatever, where some of our MD counterparts, their anatomy lab was models or something, and they certainly weren't grappling each other. And so that barrier it's normal for us to touch a patient. And I will hear the opposite. I'll hear patients say, I went to that other doctor and they didn't even touch me. And so there's something about that I think is therapeutic for patients. And it's hard to quantify. And I think that's why people have gone back and forth about OMT. There's definitely evidence for many OMT techniques and OMT overall, but it's something that's kind of hard to quantify. And I kind of wonder if some of it was never meant to be quantified. And that's just life. There are things in nature, there are things in life that are never going to be able to be quantified or measured by a randomized control trial or a meta-analysis. And I think that's okay.
Tell us a little bit about the extra OB-GYN training that you sought, how it affected your scope of practice, and why you decided to do it in the first place.
These days, especially in the urban environment, and particularly as my understanding on the East Coast, family doctors are really not in the hospital and not delivering babies, not doing any of this stuff. In the Midwest, it depends on where you go. Certainly in the rural areas, it's happening. And in some of the urban areas, it is happening. And on the West Coast, I'd say that's true as well. You know, there's definitely tertiary care centers where family doctors are delivering babies. It just looks a little different everywhere you go because it's really just about what's needed and who's there and who's trained to do what. And I would hope overall a merit-based situation. And for me, my hometown is a medium-sized hospital in a medium-sized town in Missouri. And when I was a medical student, I was thinking about this, and one of the general surgeons at this hospital said, well, you ought to go to Wichita, Kansas. The family medicine program at Via Christi there, the KU program, that's what they do. They train FPs to go to Western Kansas or Montana or Nigeria or South America or wherever and be able to do everything and take care of all levels of care because there isn't going to be a specialist. There isn't someone to refer. And he was a really big influence on me. And so I checked them out and was very, very lucky it just kind of worked out that I got a rotation there and made a good impression. And I'm so blessed to have gotten really great training there that was very intentionally driven towards what I was looking for. And, you know, there's a lot of other FP programs out there that will market themselves as full scope and things like that. But when the rubber meets the road, I think that the program I went to was one of the few that you're truly learning how to take care of really sick people and do procedures and things, because like the specialists that worked with us would be like, I'm teaching you how to do this so that when you call me from Western Kansas to transfer this patient, that I know that you did exactly what I would have wanted you to do for them, you know, right up to the point that you've got to transfer or whatever. So I went there. I did residency there at Via Christi in Wichita. And then I called up my hometown and I said, hey, I would love to come back and be the old GP. And they said, we got 7 OBGYNs and we don't really need a family doctor that delivers babies. What's that for? And so again, like I was saying about if there's a need, and there wasn't a need. So I said, well, shoot, you know, what am I going to do here? And, you know, they had kind of made it a little bit of a political situation and said, well, you know, you need to have a fellowship. And I said, okay, well, I'll pursue an OB fellowship. So I went to Springfield, Missouri. It's one of the larger cities in the state, and did an obstetrics fellowship in family medicine at one of the tertiary care centers there. And, you know, it was a good experience, and I certainly learned things. I don't think that it was necessary. I think that I received the training that I needed in residency, but I did need that piece of paper for the politics of it. And so I did that, and then I called up my hometown and said, hey, I completed a fellowship. What's up? And they said, no, we're good, you know, no thanks. And so I just stayed in the Springfield area, and for the last several years, I've been in a clinic it's a rural health clinic, but it's kind of in a suburb of Springfield. And then for a little while, I delivered at a rural hospital north of Springfield, and then also at the tertiary care center where I did my fellowship. And as time went on, I kind of overextended and consolidated to just delivering at the tertiary care center. The residents were there, and I worked with them and really enjoyed that. And it was also just simply closer to my house. Since then, I have been transitioning now, incidentally, to my hometown, because now they're down to 2 OBGYNs. And so they're very happy to have me and have been very gracious and treated me really well. But yeah, also they need me, and they didn't before. And that's the beautiful thing about family medicine, is that a well-trained family doctor can fill a lot of holes. You need peds coverage, you need OB coverage, you need a hospitalist coverage. While I was a fellow, I moonlit as a hospitalist during all this COVID stuff. And at that tertiary care center, about 50% of the hospitalists are family doctors. And you might say that to somebody in Rochester, New York, and their head would explode. They couldn't even believe that that's a thing. And what I'd say to you is, as a medical student, you kind of live in this world, or at least my experience as a medical student anyway, was you think that you can only do something if it's in that little specialty. And if you want to operate on this little finger, you got to do a subspecialty fellowship in this little finger. I can talk more about that later, but basically it's not necessarily true. It really just depends on where you go and what the need is and what your experience of training is.
Moving back in time a little bit, you mentioned you grew up amongst the Kirksville royalty in rural Missouri. Tell us, when and how did you become interested in medicine, decide that being a doctor was for you?
I grew up hearing stories about my grandpa and my uncle and my other relatives. And I was very fortunate to have that inspiration. And I never felt pressured to do it or anything, but I remember thinking, man, I want to go home at the end of the day and feel like I did something for somebody and I wasn't just a cog in a wheel somewhere, and that I was being helpful. And I explored a lot of options, but just kept coming back to what I knew, which was what they did, and how rewarding that is to be part of relationships and moments in people's lives. I mean, you can't go anywhere in my home region without somebody saying, oh, your grandpa delivered my dad and your uncle delivered me. And that's something that I really valued. So it was pretty much always, once I kind of shook it all out, and I was in college and I was kind of thinking about different things. And when I just boiled it all down to that, it was a pretty simple choice. And the same thing for applying for medical school. I didn't even think about applying to MD schools. I applied to a lot of DO schools because I didn't take for granted that I'd get into Kirksville. And there are some really cool DO schools. And what's crazy now is there's even more than there were when I applied. I interviewed out at Campbell in North Carolina when they had just started. And they just had a beautiful campus. It's a beautiful area. Their anatomy lab was brand new. And I was like really into it. And I was visiting with my grandmother and I said, yeah, I really like this new DO school out in North Carolina. I think I would enjoy going there. And she was kind of like, you're going to Kirksville. But I'm so glad I went to Kirksville. It was for the same sentimental things that I value. I really enjoyed being in the places where my family members had been, and I made there's something about med school. Some of the best friends I've ever made were in medical school, and many great memories. Obviously, the school part was extremely tough and not fun at all, but the relationship part of it, the further I get from it, the more I'm like, man, that was one of the best times of my life in terms of just social and friendship stuff. So I'm really glad I went.
Were there any notable people, experiences, memories, rotations that really just made that impression on you during your time at Kirksville?
We did our first and second year in Kirksville, and then I did my third year mostly in my hometown and kind of around rural Missouri. And then my fourth year, I just was on the road the whole time, which I really recommend that people do especially if you're single or you don't have kids. I just lived out of my car with my dog basically, and it was awesome. I did a different place each month all the way out to the Pacific Ocean and back. Wow. And it was a great experience as well. So as far as time in Kirksville goes, I don't know that there was anything that jumped out at me that probably anybody else in medical school or DO school experienced. I vaguely remember there being a report card or something for BJ Palmer, the guy that founded chiropractic. Because he went to Kirksville for like a year and dropped out, and then went and founded chiropractic. So I remember thinking that was pretty funny. And like I said before, just the OMM professors that were like David Blaine freak you out. Oh, you tripped and fell 2 weeks ago. You're like, why are you stalking me? No, I can just tell by how you're walking. I love that stuff. And I had great teachers that were wonderful, and yeah, definitely mentors. Dean Wilson there is a wonderful human being and a great doctor, and was definitely an inspiring family physician. She's a family doctor as well. It's just a great place. I think third and fourth year wise, that's when you start going and seeing stuff. It's so much like book stuff, staring at your iPad, especially like me. I came right out of college. I didn't have a lot of context other than a little bit that maybe I'd seen with my uncle. And so it was hard to make sense of some things that you're learning. And then third and fourth year is just wonderful because it's right there in front of you. And I remember I did a general surgery rotation in Tulsa at the Oklahoma State School, which is a great school, and they have the hospital there. And I remember scrubbing into a bypass. I'm standing at this dude's chest's cracked open, and I'm standing there scrubbed in next to the surgeon, and he's sweating through his gown into my gown, and I'm sweating in through mine into his gown, and the patient's hot blood is being pumped out of them and through the machine, and then there's a tube with their blood going behind your back, pushed up against your back, and it's so hot, and they're like stopping the heart, and then they restart the heart, and it's just, man, that surgery is one of the most incredible things I've ever been a part of. And I'll just tell you this story because I try to tell this story as much as I can. I scrubbed for a week. Each week you did a different thing. And I scrubbed for a week with this chest surgeon, and he never said a word to me the whole week. The residents would kind of be like, hey, go here, say this, whatever. A good resident will put you in position. But I scrubbed with him the whole week, and I mostly just held the retractor of learning, and I was completely content to do because there was some crazy stuff. I mean, it was better than television, that's for sure. The end of the week, he was replacing a mitral valve. And, I don't really understand how they do it, but they put the thing in, and then there's all these suture coming out all the way around. And then he ties each one in so it goes in and stays in the heart, And he tied a couple. And then he got to one set of the suture and he handed it to me. And I held them in my hands and I froze. And I kind of tried to, but I melted, man. I was on the spot and I froze. So anyway, he just quickly took it back from me and just kept going and finished the surgery and the whole thing like nothing happened. And I was like, oh man, I messed up. And I didn't say anything to him because he never said anything to me. And surgery's over and we're back in the doctor's lounge, and he's got a cup of coffee and he sits down at the table and he says, come here. And I sit down and I'm like, yes, sir. And he said, do you know what just happened? And I said, yeah, I froze, and he said, you shouldn't be a surgeon. And I said, oh, okay. He said, no, really. He said, when you're put on the spot like that, you got to rise to the occasion. And that's not something that can be taught. You either have it or you don't. And he was like, you don't have it, man. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, that's all right. I want to be a family doctor. Ironically, now I do. I did an emergency C-section today. And I will say that I learned from this and cultivated that make a decision, act. Because if you spend too much time thinking about something and you don't make a decision and act on it, the situation's already lost. And I learned that from this guy. It was kind of rough and, kind of hurt my feelings. And so I felt kind of emboldened because he was kind of not very nice. So I thought, well, I'll just ask him whatever I want because I've been wanting to know. And he always played Christian music in the OR. He would have them turn on the Christian radio station and play Christian music while he was operating it. And he didn't seem like a religious guy. He was a tough guy and a surgeon and all this. And so I said, well, hey, I got to ask you, why do you listen to Christian music while you operate? And he said, well, he was quiet for a while. And then he said, well, my kids found faith as adults, and it makes me think about them. And it makes me think about why I'm here. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, when I was doing medical school and residency and fellowship, and then the first many years of practice, I never saw my kids. He was like, when I'd come home, they were already asleep. And he said, I remember coming home, and one night I came home early, and my toddler daughter didn't know who I was, didn't recognize me, and was afraid. When I came in the door and tried to greet her, she ran away and hid behind her mom. And he said, and now she's an adult and found Jesus and wants me to have a relationship with Jesus too, and all this stuff. And he said, so listening to that makes me think about her and makes me think about why I'm here, because if I'm not here, there's not anybody. There's only two of them. Like in most hospitals, there's only two chest surgeons, or there's so few in the United States, right? So he said, if I wasn't here doing this, then these patients wouldn't get care. But because I'm here, I don't have that relationship with my children that I should have. And so kind of my way to honor her, kind of be with her, is to play that music while I'm operating. And it kind of reminds me what's important. And, I don't know that made a whole lot of sense to me, but I thought it was powerful. And I think the takeaway from me, medicine is a jealous mistress, and it will take everything from you if you let it. And you have to make boundaries and fight for things outside of medicine that are important to you. So anyway, I like to share that story. It's an unusual story that is kind of uncomfortable, but it's therapeutic for me to share it.
I feel like I should go hug my parents and my siblings after that one. A very important, a lot of students, I think, understand that, but it doesn't really hit home until you kind of get there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it snuck up on me, man. I finished fellowship. I got married. And a year or two out of fellowship, I was working 3 weekends a month and 3 weeknights a week. And I was never home, and I never saw my wife. And one day she said something to me, and I woke up and was like, what happened? It wasn't like I wanted it to be that way or did it on purpose. It's just, you're a hot commodity. Everybody needs something from you. I mean, you've seen the statistics on physician shortages. If you could be everywhere all the time, it would still not be enough. So you're just constantly being pulled to be in different places and to do more things. And I mean, I'll be home and not be on call, and I'm getting phone calls. And it's kind of hurtful to the people that love you, because they're trying to be present with you, and you're getting called, and you're getting called, and you're getting called, and you're getting texts, and oh, you forgot to do this, and you got to go run, get on the computer, And so, yeah, I mean, it's important to guard your life, because if you're not your best self, if your family isn't taken care of first, then you're not going to be the best you can be for your patients. I mean, that's the bottom line. And then you're going to be a burnout, grumpy doctor that doesn't take care of patients spiritually, emotionally, because you're not spiritually and emotionally whole yourself, So
Switching gears a little bit, tell us about your exposure to the military at any point, before medical school, during, what kind of made you go down that route?
My grandpa was in the Marine Corps in World War II. He was in the Pacific Theater. And I have a cousin who was in the National Guard. And I had a really good buddy of mine that was killed in Afghanistan. My roommates in college were Marines. And then, of course, I grew up with 9/11 as a defining event in my life, as many of us did. And so I always kind of wanted to serve, but I also didn't want it to consume my life. I wasn't convinced that the military was this great career that it's often portrayed. And so I kind of wanted to do something where I felt like I was contributing, but not do something that was all that I did. And so the HPSP thing just didn't really appeal to me, because it's a full-time active duty, 8-year commitment kind of deal. And I was like, what if I do that and I don't like it? I'm stuck for like 10 years of my life. So there's this program, or there was, called TMS, Training in Medical Specialty, where after you become a resident, you can join that way, and you join as a reservist. So you have to drill like once a quarter, and that's basically it until you're out of residency. And then once you're out of residency, you owe a certain amount of time of just being an active reservist, where you drill 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty good. And if I don't take any of their money, then I only have to do it for 3 years. And I wasn't doing it for money. They didn't pay for my med school. I didn't get anything. I got drill pay, and that was it. And I'm really glad that I did that, because I accomplished exactly what I wanted to do, which was I got to contribute. I got to do some cool stuff. I delivered babies in 2 different naval hospitals. I got to go abroad. I went on field exercises and got to hang out with the guys that shoot the guns. And I got to ride in attack helicopters and all of that stuff. And I, at the same time, did not get deployed for a year to 18 months away from my family. And I got to have a civilian practice and a civilian education, which I think was a good thing. I think a lot of military programs are good, and a lot of military jobs for physicians are good. But one of the big problems is a lot of them don't get a lot of volume. And it's kind of more like the VA, where they see 12 patients a day and they're like, oh man, that was a busy day. And I see 30 patients a day, and that's routine. There was a pretty good article a while back about there are general surgeons in the military that are doing 1 gallbladder a month. And the rural hospital I'm at now, one general surgeon might do like 5 gallbladders in a week. So that was just kind of a thing that I didn't want to risk that. That's not true everywhere. There's many very busy military hospitals, but you aren't guaranteed to be stationed there. The 2 hospitals I delivered babies at were not very busy at all. But I got to contribute, and I got to take care of patients that are willing to put themselves in harm's way for our country. And that's what I wanted to do. And I got to do some things that I think were helpful to them and made a difference in their life or their career, advocating for them. And that was enough for me. So I think that I feel a little guilty that during Iraq and Afghanistan, when guys were getting blown up and shot at, and 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, that kind of stretch where it was really a lot of violence and a lot of our people were hurt. I regret that I was not around for any of that. But there were many people who suffered the consequences of their time in the war on terror, and I was able to take care of them after the fact, and PTSD or whatever it was. And I'm glad I got to do that. So.
And it sounds like a good balance between military service and normal medical education that maybe a lot of our listeners don't know about. I certainly didn't.
When I was in medical school, it was presented to us like it's HPSP or you're up a creek. And that's not true. The reality is if you have a pulse and a medical degree, you can get any job that requires a pulse and a medical degree. It's not like the military recruiters are like, oh, you're not a medical student? Well, we only take medical students. No, they would love a board certified whatever, or a res at any point in your career. But they kind of gaslight you because their goal is to get you recruited, right? So they kind of present it like, oh, if you don't sign up for this now, you won't get these benefits. Well, that might be true, but there's another program for the next season of training that you're in, or when you become an attending or whatever. When I went to the quote unquote boot camp, the officer development school for doctors, lawyers, chaplains, nurses, and engineers, knife and fork school, as they call it. It wasn't easy, but it was definitely easier than real boot camp. I mean, we had like an ortho surgeon who was 65. Wow. So you can join anytime that you want in your career. And the funny thing is that a lot of people have a wife and a child, and they suddenly say, oh man, this is not what I want to do. So on the flip side, the other thing is I might advise people to do it earlier, because that's the time in your life when you can.
So then your process of seeking and applying residency was probably much more traditional than the HPSP.
The military thing didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't even I joined the Navy Reserve the fall of my second year of residency. I had long hair and an unshaved face, and I was not an HPSP guy or anything like that.
How did you choose your program? What was the draw compared to others? And did being a DO matter any more or less in that area?
So I went to a historically MD program that absorbed a DO program. So for a while before they combined the matches, they participated in both matches. And they had made this deal when they absorbed that program that they would always have a certain number of DOs to honor that. And actually, while I was there, they kind of dissolved all of that, and because the match combined and everything, and they just said, we're not even going to do any of that anymore. And that's fine, because some years it was half DOs, some years there were no DOs, some years there was something in between. There were probably a quarter of the faculty maybe were DOs. I really didn't feel like anybody held that against me in the interview process. And it's family medicine, so that's different too. But I was looking for programs and stuff. It was not really an issue. I think in training it was a little different, because if I wanted to do OMT and I had an MD faculty attending that day, they had to kind of work out what that looked like. And we would talk to each other and about a concept, and the MD would be like, what are you talking about? But I'd say for the most part, it was pretty much a non-issue. I have friends that did competitive specialties like dermatology or general surgery or whatever, and they all said the same thing. They were like, the thing that people don't understand in medical school is that it's not about all of your numbers. People get on whatever the chat room and they'd be like, oh, if my complex is this and I do the EOS, it's like, no, nobody cares. You need to get good grade, but it's really all about relationships. So if you rotate at a place, if you do, in the DO world, we call it audition rotations. In the MD world, they call it a sub-I. But if you go there and you get to know all the residents, you get to know all the faculty, and you make a good impression, when they go on to rank day and they throw your face up there, everybody's going to say, that guy showed up early. He worked hard. He was nice to be around. We liked him. He hung out with us afterwards. He came to whatever social activity. We enjoyed this guy or gal, and we want them to be part of our team. You're at the top of the list, man. And they didn't even talk about what your score was. And I think that's something that's not explained to medical students enough. And there are definitely some toxic academic programs where maybe the program director makes the list or something, and that's a different story. And there's not much you can do about that except then have the numbers. But that's not true for most places. Most places, you go there, you build relationships, you meet as many people as you can, you go to all the things you can, you work hard, you're happy to be there, you're pleasant to be around. Because my thing is, like, working with students and residents, I can teach you how to practice medicine. You have that time of residency, you are a physician. I can teach you medicine. I can't teach somebody to work hard and be nice to be around and treat people well. So that's something your parents should have taught you. I can't teach character. And the people that lack that are the most difficult people to teach, because they don't interact well with people. Sometimes they're arrogant. They're not open to learning and not open to being part of a team. And those things are more important at the residency level than your numbers. And that's kind of something that I always have tried to make a point to kind of preach to medical students is, if you're really interested in a program, you should go there. Use your electives at the end of third year and fall of fourth year, and do a month there, do 2 weeks there. The program I went didn't have any. And I said, well, like, if you have anything, like, I'll do 2 weeks of nights or something. And they were like, okay, well, you could do 2 weeks of nights. And so they put me down for 2 weeks of nights, and I was just ready to do that. And then I got there and they were like, oh, we had someone drop. We'll just put you on days. And so then I was very fortunate. I got to be on days. And then that was something they talked about supposedly at rank day was, oh, he wanted to be here so bad that he volunteered to do 2 weeks of nights. And man, I mean, that says something, because you want to work with people that want to be there. You don't want to work with somebody that, well, this is kind of my second choice. I just want to be a surgeon, not because I really want to work with these people.
So you talked a little bit about coming out of residency and kind of looking for a practice between your hometown and other places in Missouri. What were you looking for? What were the pros and cons, and how has that changed?
Well, I think I wanted to work somewhere that I could have a clinical practice, but still get to work with learners, where I could practice the way that I wanted to practice and not have to be beholden to a toxic political situation that you sometimes see in some hospitals, especially being a family doctor. You don't want to go somewhere that they don't think you should be doing what you're doing, right? So, and I was very fortunate that the two hospitals I worked out of in the beginning were places that already had family doctors there doing similar things. And in the case of where I'm transitioning to now, they didn't, but they need me, and I'm filling a need for them and helping them. And so they're appreciative. But if I went to some big tertiary academic center where they'd never had a family doctor do that, it would be annoying to them, and maybe even like terrifying, because they can't comprehend that that's a thing for them. It'd be like telling them that a nurse practitioner is doing surgery or something. That would probably be their reactions. Yeah, I just wanted to go someplace that I would be honored for what I was able to do, that it would be a merit-based kind of thing, and an opportunity to take care of patients that need our care, and it not be about, oh, well, Charles McCharles IV says that you needed to do a subspecialty in this little finger, or you shouldn't be seeing that patient. All of that bull crap.
Do you want to tell us more about the little finger? You mentioned that earlier.
Well, I use that example because you go to a big urban academic center, and the general surgeon doesn't do general surgery. The general surgeon does gallbladders and appendectomies. If they need colorectal surgery, there's a colorectal surgeon. There's a subspecialty for every little thing. And you go to a rural area and the general surgeon is doing C-sections, So, and I personally think that patients benefit from somebody who's well-rounded. I actually don't think that if there's something that's all you do, that's necessarily beneficial, because there is a very rare situation where you're doing something like a C-section and it goes exactly the way all other C-sections do, for example. My uncle actually went to Barnes-Jewish Washington University for a procedure and had a complication with that procedure. And the guy that did that procedure did a subspecialty fellowship in that. That's like the only thing that he does. And I thought about it, and it was kind of like the military guys. He's in his lab multiple days a week, and has academic time, whatever that means, and another several half days a week, and is like supervising the residents and not really taking care of patients. And he's really only operating himself by himself at very infrequent intervals, whereas a rural general surgeon is doing that same procedure multiple times a week, hundreds of times a year. So who do you think is better at the surgery? This is just common sense. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean that the urban guy doesn't have things to contribute. He may know every tiny little study and fact about that organ or that little region of the abdomen that's his field. Yeah, he might be able to tell you every little fact about the pinky finger, but I'd still take the rural surgeon over that guy. That's my perspective. And I think that would cause some heads to explode, but that's the reality, is that a lot of those academic guys, they're not seeing that many patients. And it's like, why would you take somebody's spot in medical school and then not see any patients? So we definitely need academia. We need people doing research and things like that. And so I don't mean to say that they're not needed or important, but I think that it's certainly overrated. I'll put it that way.
Can you tell us one thing about you that has made you successful? Kind of, what is your superpower?
I could take it on the chin and keep going forward. I think this 10 years of your life, you're going to get punched in the face a lot. And you're going to have setbacks. You're going to have hard times. You're going to have emotionally hard times. You're going to have physically hard times where you're exhausted and you're tired. And residency, you get up at 4 a.m. and you don't go home until 10 p.m. And then you get up and you do it again. And it's just a victory that you brushed your teeth. And then there are times where it's hard with your family, like I talked about. Or there's times when there are things in your personal life that you're not being able to fulfill because you've made this commitment to medicine. It's a jealous mistress, like I said. And you have to be able to kind of keep it together and keep going forward. And I think the first and second year of medical school, at least for me, and first and second year of residency were the hardest because it was doing a new thing and learning how to do that and rising to the occasion and learning how to balance taking care of yourself and what other priorities at the same time. And when you're under stress, you have a tendency to say and do stupid things or just not handle things well. And that's okay, but you learn from it and you make all things better. You learn from it and rise to the occasion or rise from the ashes of whatever situation, and you're better for it, right? I would say that that's been my superpower, is that when I was in college, I just kind of would go to class and like kind of listen and kind of write some notes, and then I wouldn't study and I'd get an A. And then I went to medical school, and you cannot do that, man. It doesn't matter if you're a genius. You cannot do that. Actually, that's not true. We had one guy that was just absolutely brilliant, and he did that. He was like down at the front in lecture playing Dota, playing a video game on his iPad the whole time. And the dude was like the top of our class. So there are some people like that, but I couldn't do it. I got to medical school and I got my butt kicked, man. And I had to learn how to study, how to be organized, how to prepare. And that was an adjustment. It was painful and stressful. And then got to residency, and that's a whole nother level, because suddenly you have to make decisions, and suddenly you have to talk to other people that are way smarter than you and communicate and figure out what's going on with patients, who's sick, who's not sick. Very, very challenging, also very stressful. And man, I got punched in the face a lot, and I'm a better person and a better doctor for surviving. Yeah, I think it was just my superpower would be that I didn't give up. I just kept going, even though there were a lot of points where I thought about quitting or wanted to quit, or maybe somebody else would have quit. It's not because I'm smart. It's not because I'm talented. It's just because I got kind of a steel forehead, I guess. And I kept taking blow after blow and kept going forward. And I think that would be my message to anybody, is like, it's normalized that this is hard, and it's okay to fail. It's okay to not do as well as you're used to. It's okay to make mistakes. The point is learning. And you can't learn and you can't grow if you don't have adversity. Growth is painful. You're not growing if it doesn't hurt. If at least it's not uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable. So.
And this is our grand finale question. What is the best piece of advice that someone else has given you, from grade school, college, med school, residency, anywhere along the line, that you think would have the greatest value to our people out there?
My cousin, Dr. Cam Meyers in St. Louis, is a chiropractor. And when I was going to medical school, he said, when you don't know what to do, when you're overwhelmed, just do something. Just do something. Don't be paralyzed with indecision. Just do something. Pick something and start reading it. Study something. Work on something. Just do something. When you hear the pancake analogy, you have these stacks of pancakes and you have to eat so many a day, or they get really big really fast. So just do something, right? It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't need to be this incredible plan. Just pick something. And I think it's true clinical practice as well. You have 25 patients to round on, or a million messages in your workload, or you keep getting all these phone calls, or you have to make the call. Are we going to do a C-section or not? Are we going to go to surgery or not? What are you going to do in the surgery? Are you going to do this or that? Make a decision. Just do something. I think that would be my advice, is when the game's on the line, just do something, make a decision, act on it.
Very wise. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Myers.
Thanks for having me. Happy to talk with you. Yeah, man, I got my ass kicked. I think of myself as a regular guy that I got very lucky. But, I also had some things that were helpful, like the family stuff. I went to med school with, and you probably have too, with people that they were waiting tables for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they were better at studying than me because they were like, man, this sure beats the shit out of what I was doing. And they were the first person in their family to go to medical school, which is so incredible. They're starting such a legacy.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tian Yu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.